we might have time for questions at the end, but because things have been running so behind, I think we're going to move right ahead with Jason, and then maybe if there's time, our timekeeper says we have time, we'll do questions at the end. Does that sound good, Jason? So this is Jason Shankel, who's a 20-year veteran of the games industry, and he's going to talk about how lessons from the games industry can inform us about the future of AR. And while they're changing over, actually, does anyone have a question for Lauren Elliott?
Yeah.
See, come on. Anyone here who's okay. Oh yes, Sean, because you've done a lot in... Sean, question is from Sean White, who has done amazing work in this space. So this is an interesting question.
I was just curious, is that system ongoing? What was the sort of community that gets created around that identification? Are there other ways for them to see it? I'm really liking that project.
Yeah, no, it's, thank you. It's a fellow that I'm working with is at a company called Project Noah. They're a group back east that is trying this sort of idea of getting kids all around the world to be interested in science and not having it a nerdy kind of a thing, but having it just absolutely fun and engaging them in that. So they've actually set up they're doing the software back end, and I do the hardware stuff and the integration. So it is truly meant to be not just for bugs, it's truly ideally meant to be for all kinds of wildlife and science. But again, trying to not make it so sciencey that, trying to make it cool, for the kids.
Okay, am I on? All right. So my name is Jason Shankel. I work with Elliot and Will at Syntertainment. And you grow up reading Islands of the Net, and then Bruce Sterling comes to hear you talk about technology, sociology, and literature. So no pressure up here on the stage at all. As Tish mentioned, I've been in the computer game industry for 20 years. And coming to this conference, I have overwhelmed with a sense of deja vu about how the computer game industry evolved from the time that I entered it. When people ask me today, how do you get into the game industry, I typically don't have an answer. I have no idea, because when I entered the game industry, it was the kind of job that you might take as a fallback in case a career in Civil War reenactment or model shipbuilding didn't work out. And of course today, it's like, you go to game dev or E3 and it's like, trying to check into the Super Bowl. And I feel that the augmented reality space today is where the game industry was all those years ago. And so now I find myself in this new industry of the augmented, socially connected, personal lifestyle utility app space, geo-social local utility app space. And I'm facing the same kinds of questions that we faced in the 90s on games. And so I just wanted to talk about 3 areas today really quickly where I think my experiences or our experiences in industry in games are going to inform the future of AR. First of all is technology. How the technology curve that we rode in the 90s is going to mirror the technology curve of AR. The second is the sociology. What happens when you start bringing a broader audience of ordinary customers into what has been a niche or an advanced research kind of area or a small market kind of area. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the literature of augmented reality and the literature of games and the literature of things and how these technologies impact our ability to express ourselves creatively. So first, technology, the innovation curve. What does that look like? So our experience from the 90s in game development, and particularly in the development of high-speed networking and high-speed 3D graphics, was the innovation curve. And what the innovation curve was for us there is that you enter a period where the technology that you want to bring to consumers exists in a high-end space. High-end 3D graphics existed early in the mid-90s on high-end workstations, $20,000 systems that people used for CAD and things like that. And that technology was very, very far ahead of where the consumer market was. And then as the consumer market started looking for 3D hardware, we found ourselves in this API battle between OpenGL and Direct3D, where there was this question as to whether we should follow the OpenGL model, which is the high-end model, which says you define an API, it's up to the hardware to support it. This is an interface for transformation and rendering, and the machine can or cannot do what you ask it to do. The Direct3D model is a hardware abstraction model, which says there's all this different hardware out there, and it all has different capabilities and different interfaces. We will provide you with a unified interface to those capabilities, but it's up to you to figure out what the hardware is capable of and limit yourself to those capabilities. You have to manage texture resources. You have to manage what kind of buffers you can create. It's all up to you to ask the hardware what it can do. And we had this huge struggle in game development between these two philosophies. And ultimately, those philosophies that argument has become obsolete at this point, where OpenGL is widely supported now and Direct3D is mature and capable, as we reach this point of convergence, where the hardware that became available to the consumer actually begins to surpass what the high-end curve is doing and begins to drive innovation. So today, in high-performance real-time graphics, it's consumers that are driving innovation and not high-end workstations. And once that convergence occurred, then this whole question of whether you abstract hardware or require certain things of hardware just becomes moot. And until hardware converges, until the high-end station and the consumer market converge, there's no answer to the question of which the best API is. There's always just going to be this fight. And so in AR, we're facing the same kinds of things today, with questions like occlusion and high resolution, local resolution of object position and orientation, things like this. We see that advanced technologies are solving these problems. There will be cameras on our iPhones soon that take provide Z buffers along with the color buffers when you take a picture. So your AR objects will be able to occlude and go behind things that are in the local space. Google will release, or somebody will release, a database of 3D geometry and occlusion boxes for cities and rural areas and things like that, so that when you hold up your phone and you're playing an IR game, or when you're playing Ingress, we can make sure that the objects that you see are behind something, that you don't see them when they go behind something. These problems will be solved. There will be toys that you can just throw on a table where every single toy can report to your phone exactly where it is with respect to every other toy. Right? All of that is coming. And so the idea is that you should plan for that future while you're building for today. Just assume that that's something that's coming in the next 5 or 10 years. The second thing I wanted to talk about was a sociology of bringing consumers into our marketplace. Right now we have these little phones, we all have these things, and they're in the hands of millions of people, all of whom are looking for different kinds of interesting experiences and fun little toys to play with, and they're looking to us to provide them. So what happens when you sort of unleash the cobra out into the world and start letting people play with advanced technology? Well, the history of this, we can look to what I call the other AR, alternate reality games. My experience with alternate reality games began in the 1980s when my friends and I used to play Steve Jackson's Killer, mostly because we wanted to meet Linda Fiorentino. Spoiler alert, you don't get to meet Linda Fiorentino when you play Killer. But Killer was basically a game where geeky kids kind of ran around with toy guns and putting alarm clock bombs in each other's lockers and things like that. And we had to assassinate one another. And of course, there was a minor sort of Dungeons and Dragons style moral panic where parents thought we were all going to join whatever Al-Qaeda was back then or something like that. And so there are little incidences where this game was blamed for somebody going crazy or whatever. But pretty much it was a low temperature kind of fad that kind of went on through the 90s. This idea evolved into an actual corporate hosted event when Electronic Arts developed Majestic. Majestic was a game developed in the late 90s to the early 2000s that took place on the internet, the alternate reality of the internet, where the game, it was sort of an X-Files conspiracy theory game where the game called you. It sent you emails. You'd get a message saying go to a website and enter a code, and then you had to do a hack to get a clue that would take you to another website, and then you get a call from someone who's in a desperate situation, and you have to go unlock some things so they can get out of a warehouse and deliver the code to somebody else. And it was fantastic. It was actually very well reviewed. People thought it was well constructed. They put something like $20 million into it, and then they released it in August of 2001. Fantastic timing for a government conspiracy, private syndicate, paranoid game, right? 1 month later, nobody had an interest in receiving strange phone calls about weird codes and things online. Okay, and so the experience of Majestic teaches us that when the world is your platform, you have to cede control. You have to be prepared for anything to change. The entire world can change overnight. Okay, I mean, just look at Game of Thrones, the Red Wedding. Everyone's looking at everyone who's read the books like, you guys knew that was coming? What's wrong with you? You must be crazy, And so that's the real version of that in the world is things like 9/11 or riots or a bad election or a strange weather event can completely change the context for players in the real world of your game that depends on the world being stable. World stability is an issue all over the place. And of course, the modern version of this is Ingress, Google's Ingress, which is Majestic plus AR. And there are reports on Reddit, I haven't been able to confirm them, but that people are having run-ins with the police because now you're in the middle of the war on terror, Homeland Security era, you're standing in front of a public building, frantically poking numbers into your iPhone. And we have to realize that when we create these kinds of alternate reality games, and especially when we add augmented reality to alternate reality, so that people are actually literally seeing things that other people are not seeing, we have to understand that we're creating a different context. Some people are seeing things that other people are not seeing. And the ordinary definition of that is insanity. Okay, when one person is seeing something and another person is not seeing, somebody is crazy. And we have to be aware that when we are putting people out into the world to play games based on a field of information and data that other people in the world who can see what they're doing can't see, that creates a dangerous situation for us as entertainers. Okay. Well, if that's what's to be avoided, then what's the hope here? What positive thing can we bring as a culture? In computer games, there have been for years this perennial argument over whether computer games are art or not. Is a computer game art? And Roger Ebert famously argued that they're not art because I don't like them, or whatever. And computer games, to me, it's a silly argument. Obviously, interactive entertainment is an art form. All it takes to be an art form is if you are a medium that facilitates the creative expression on the part of an artist, right? And so clearly you can create something that's interactive and artistic. And clearly we can do this in games. And some games arguably are art, and some most are pop, sure, okay, right? What about AR? Right. What kind of, does AR facilitate any form of human communication, human collaboration, human creativity that is substantial, it advances us as a people? And the first place we can look to this is hypertext and the development of hypertext. Now, in the 1940s, George Louis Borges wrote a short story called The Garden of Forking Paths, which is a story about a guy who's discovered a work by one of his ancestors who wanted to write who wanted to build a labyrinth that nobody could escape from and write a novel that would allow people to experience the novel, every possible outcome of the story will be expressed within the novel, like a giant choose-your-own adventure. And very explicitly, Borges' story, and then he finds out, of course, that the labyrinth is the novel, and that depending on which way you read the fragments of the novel, different stories play out. And Borges was very explicitly, directly the inspiration for HTML. HTML is arguably the most powerful literary device that humanity has created in the past several hundred years. It's beyond the Gutenberg press in terms of what it has, of the power it has put into all of our hands to create hyperlinked literary experiences where people can choose their own way. Everybody in this room, you can spend hours just wandering through Wikipedia, right? Because a link lead to a link lead to a link. This used to be a very difficult idea. This used to be a very advanced idea. You used to have to be George Louis Borges to think of this kind of thing. But HTML and then, of course, the the abstract versions of HTML like WordPress and Wiki and these things that allow us to develop HTML documents more efficiently without having to learn the code, have turned us all into little Borgeses. We all live in the garden of forking paths, and we don't even realize it anymore. You read that story today, and it does not feel like this is some big innovative idea. Okay, so what is the literature that we should look to when we are thinking about what AR can add to the world? And my argument is that we want to look at James Joyce in general, but specifically Ulysses. Okay, in Ulysses, James Joyce set out, quick show of hands, how many people have taken a shot at Joyce at all in this life? Okay, so it's difficult. James Joyce is difficult. He's intentionally difficult in a lot of ways. But Ulysses is a story of two men, Stephen Dedalus and Leopold Bloom, traveling through Dublin on a particular day, June 16th, 1904, which has become known as Bloom's Day. And in this novel, he created a version of Dublin that's incredibly highly detailed over what you put in Augment. Now, when you pick it up, typically most of us come away from our first reading of Ulysses with this impression. Okay, it's very easy reading the book to get lost in Joyce's language and his sexual obsessions and his various other issues. But fundamentally, what you realize is that he has captured in this book a version of Dublin that is so complete and so accurate to June 16th, 1904. Okay, and then augmented it with this phantasmagorical story told from the point of view of Homer, of these two guys that follows kind of the pattern of Homer's Odyssey. And his goal here, as he said, he wanted to create a picture of Dublin so complete that if you lost the city, you could rebuild it from the book. I don't know if he quite did that, but what he did do, like a quantum mechanic, okay, is he created a vision of Dublin so complete that Dublin itself has changed to accommodate Joyce. Right? Bloom's Day is now celebrated around the world, everywhere you want to go, but especially in Dublin with a walk through the course of the novel. There's a new app out, Joyce Ways, that if you take to Dublin will read you parts of Ulysses as you travel through it and tell you which way to go. Okay, and this is the potential of augmented reality, is to make us all into little Joyces. You know, not just Dublin, but San Francisco, Berkeley, New York, Houston, Omaha, Vancouver, Portland, every city in the world can become a collaborative space of a series of crossing timelines and events and histories of people's visitations there. No longer will our experiences in the world disappear into a cloud of memory or be stuck in the stream of consciousness of a single writer. It'll be something that we can all share and create together. And just as I think it was Philip yesterday said, you know, we're going to create a version of the world, a copy of the world using augmented reality where we can own and explore and all this kind of thing. It's like, this is how we're going to do it. You know, we are going to create a world where every day is Bloom's Day. And so thank you very much.